What is QBS, and how do clients, public agencies, and private sector clients cheat themselves out of the benefits of QBS when they don't follow the proper process? Really important questions when you're going to choose a land surveyor. I've talked a lot before about how it's a mistake to choose a land surveyor based solely on low price or low bid. We get asked here at Redefined Horizons to submit bids all the time. We don't do that. So this is a theme that's dear to my heart. But I wanted to talk about QBS for a few minutes. We don't deal with QBS as much here at Redefined Horizons because we don't do government work as a general rule. We do mostly private sector work, but early on in my career, I did almost all public agency work, and QBS is really important. And I think some of the principles apply to the work that we do in the private sector. So I wanted to talk a little bit about QBS. So what is QBS? QBS is an abbreviation for qualifications-based selection. And what that means is when you're going to go hire a land surveyor, you want to do that based on his or her qualifications. So you're not going to just go pick your land surveyor based on the cheapest price. This also applies to other design and real estate professionals. So it applies to architects and civil engineers and structural engineers and geotechnical engineers and landscape architects and land planners and biologists. So those kinds of professions, as a general rule, I believe you want to select those professionals based on their qualifications and not based on low price. So that's what qualifications-based selection means. In California, qualifications-based selection is the law for public agencies. So both at the state and the local level. There's also a requirement at the federal level. So what that means is if you're a government agency in California and you want to go hire a land surveyor, you are supposed to do that using qualifications-based selection. We are regularly asked by public agencies to submit bids for surveys. It doesn't happen as much as it used to, but it does still happen, and that is a problem. Those agencies are breaking the law. I'm part of ACEC, American Council of Engineering Companies, and they work really hard, especially here in California, to educate government agencies about that, but QBS is the law in California. So why? Why is QBS the law? I'm going to give you 3 reasons why QBS is the law for land surveying in California. Number 1, some really smart folks realized a long time ago that surveying is not a commodity. Okay, it's not like buying a 2x4. And I know there's some carpenters out there that would argue even 2x4s aren't commodities. There's different types of 2x4s, different quality of lumber. I work wood, so I know that from firsthand experience. If you ever see a guy at the hardware store pick up a 2x4 and kind of look down at it, turn it around like he's checking for warp in the board, right? So even in the same brand and type of wood in a 2x4, you've got good 2x4s and bad 2x4s. So if you can't treat something as simple as a 2x4 like a commodity, can't treat something as complicated as land surveying like a commodity. So that's one reason why QBS is the law. People realized it's a mistake to treat one survey exactly like the other. All surveys are unique. There's different ways to get surveys done. Land surveys are not a commodity product. The other reason, second reason why QBS is the law, is if you try and select a surveyor based on low bid, dishonest surveyors can cut corners in their work product, or they can artificially reduce the cost of their bid to get the work and then hit you as the client with extra charges after the work is done. That is a notorious practice in our industry. It's a dirty practice that dishonest surveyors use. A long time ago, a lot of smart people realized, hey, when you try and choose a surveyor on low price, there's going to be guys that cheat, and you end up paying more in the long run than you would be if you selected a surveyor you trusted based on qualifications. That's the second reason. The third reason QBS is the law is because these same smart people realize that you want to hire a land surveyor or other design professional that is going to look out for your interests as a client, and that is not just going to be looking out for their own financial interests. And when you choose a low bid professional, that is harder to achieve. So now that doesn't mean that QBS, and I'm going to talk later, QBS is not perfect, and that doesn't mean that if you use QBS you're always going to get a saint of a consultant, but you generally end up with a higher quality consultant when you use a process like QBS than you do when you select based on low price. So what are some of the benefits of QBS? I told you why it's the law. What are some of the benefits? I'm going to give you 4 reasons, 4 benefits of QBS. Okay, and this applies, and I should clarify, QBS is required of government agencies. It's not required in the public sector. But I'm going to give you 4 benefits of QBS, which will explain to you why I think you should be using QBS whether you're in the public sector or not. So even if you're in the private sector, smart folks in the private sector still use qualifications-based selection for these 4 reasons when they're hiring a land surveyor. Number 1, when you use QBS, you're going to get more accurate upfront costs. When you select on low bid, the surveyor is going to have an incentive to give you an artificially low cost, period. That's just, even if he's an honest surveyor, he's going to have to fight that incentive, right? So he's going to go in with a really skinny scope of services. He's going to find ways to cut corners. He's going to fight with you about it after the fact, and he's going to hit you with change orders. So that is a major negative, right? So a benefit of QBS is the surveyor is going to try and give you an accurate cost up front because he knows that's not the primary thing that's going to award him the project, and he or she is going to work to communicate to you what the actual costs are going to be. Why is that important? Those accurate cost estimate up front are really important for clients because they need that to budget, they need that to plan, they need that to make decisions about when to do certain things in the project or if to do certain things in the project. And so one of the advantages of QBS is you're going to get more accurate cost estimates up front. It's going to make it easier for you to plan, and it's going to keep you from spending unnecessary money as the project moves through design and construction. The second reason is QBS encourages good behavior by your consultants. If you're the client, if you're using QBS, your consultant they're going to have an incentive to be more professional, to have honest conversations with you about risk and the work that's included in their scope and what you really need to get the job done. Let me just give you an example of that. Let me give you a contrast. Let's say you want to build a bridge. Okay, if you're selecting your surveyor based on low bridge, the surveyor has an incentive to go in there and tell you everything's going to be okay, and you don't need to do this and you don't need to do that, and don't worry if that's not included in my scope, because he wants his upfront cost to be as low as possible. Okay? If you're selecting a surveyor based on qualifications, she's going to go in there and tell you, hey, you should think about this, you might want to consider this, this isn't in my scope, but you may want it, here's why, let's talk about the risk and if it's worth the cost. You're just going to get more professional behavior from your consultant if you're selected based on qualifications and not low price. The third reason is, as a general rule, when you go with qualifications-based selection, you're going to get a higher quality work product, you're going to get better client service, right? So once you select based on low bid, the surveyor's got an incentive to cut corners on that work product, to give you a skinny work product, right? Because the less time he puts into that work product, the more profit he's going to make, right? And so, yeah, you get what you pay for sometimes, right? Like, when I was a young man, I used to buy cheap tools. And my dad told me when I was a young man, don't buy cheap tools. And I didn't listen. I bought cheap tools anyways. And I buy a cheap tool, I'd use it twice, and it would break. And what I realized after a while was I spent more money buying cheap tools than I would be if I bought quality tools. So now I only buy quality tools, even though it costs a little more money up front, because I learned that lesson the hard way. Same thing with land surveyors, right? If you select based on low bid, you're going to get crummy product most of the time. And I know this because I see crummy product come across my desk all the time on a regular basis. Okay? The fourth reason is, and this is really important, this might be the most important reason, when you use qualifications-based selection, what that allows you to do is have a conversation with your land surveyor about ways that she may be able to innovate on your project, apply new technology or a new technique, or take a unique approach to the project that will either A, reduce your risk as the project owner, or B, save you money, or C, save you time. Any of those three. And so what happens in order to really do a good job of low bid selection, you have to have a very well-defined scope of services. And as soon as you spell out to me exactly what you want as a client, you've taken away from me the opportunity as a land surveyor to bring you the benefits of all my knowledge and experience, right? So for example, if you're going to select based on low bid, you might say, the building survey has to be done with a total station. Well, what if I can do a better job in less time and for less money if I use a laser scanner? See? Or what if you tell me that topo survey has to be done with GPS surveying methods, But I know I can get you just as good of a result with a UAV topo, right? Or a better result even for less money. See, once you decide to select based on low bid, you've got to have that really detailed, specific scope of services, and then you've robbed me as the consultant of the ability to innovate for you. You've robbed me of the ability to have a conversation with you about a unique approach, right? And so there's so much that you're taking away from me, so much value that I can bring to your project. So the right way to do qualifications-based selection, and this relates to that fourth benefit, is to give your consultant a general idea, a general sketch of the project that you're trying to accomplish. Okay? Don't tell them what you need from a surveyor. Tell them what you're trying to do. I talk about that in another video. I'm trying to build a bridge. I know I need a surveyor. Select your surveyor based on qualifications, and then have a conversation with your surveyor about what should your scope be, land surveyor. How can you help me get this project built as efficiently and as inexpensively and as effectively as possible? When you spell out the scope and require a price up front, you're going to rob your consultant of the ability to bring that value to you, and it's a really sad thing when that happens. All right. So how do public agencies and other clients cheat themselves out of the benefit of QBS, even when they pretend to follow QBS? And a lot of public agencies do this. They say they follow QBS, but they just pay lip service. They don't really do it. So what are 4 ways that clients cheat themselves out of the benefit of QBS, even if they claim to be using the QBS process? Number 1, they turn QBS into QBB. What's QBB? Instead of qualifications-based selection, they do qualifications-based bidding. And here's what it looks like. They go out and they say, we're going to select a group of 3 or 5 or 10 consultants. We're going to do that based on qualifications. They do that, they get a pre-qualified list. Then every time they get a project, they send the project out to the qualified list and they ask for a bid. That's not QBS, folks. That's the same thing as doing low bid selection. All you've done is limit your pool of bidders. That's all you've done, right? So for all the reasons we just talked about, those 4 benefits, you lose all those benefits when you go from QBS, when you turn QBS into QBB, to qualifications-based bidding. So if that's how your agency operates, you're losing all the benefits of QBS, and you're just limiting your pool of bidders. That's all you're doing. Okay. Number 2, agencies claim to use a QBS process, but they focus on price as the primary selection factor. So this is a situation where the client says, oh, hey, we're going to do qualifications-based selection. Send us your resumes, send us your company profile, tell us every project you've worked on for the last 50 years. And by the way, give us a price for this scope, and that's what we're going to choose on. And here's the silly part. Even if an agency doesn't come out and say that, if you're an agency and you provided a fairly detailed scope of work and you ask for a price, we all know what you're doing. We're not stupid, right? Like, we're land surveyors, we're fairly sophisticated, and we understand that it doesn't matter what resume we put in, it doesn't matter what company profile we put in. If you're asking for a scope and a fee, chances are that's what's going to govern the selection, right? And so essentially, you're pretending to use a QBS process, but you're really not. You're just selecting based on low bid. Number 3, the agency pretends to run a QBS process, and then they go and award the project to the ridiculously low bidder. And I see this all the time. Let me talk about what I mean by ridiculously low. So I had a situation where there was 4 consultants that submitted a proposal for a project to a government agency, and the 3 of us, I was in this group, 3 of us land surveyors, we were all within 10% of each other's fee. The 4th surveyor was about 50% of the cost, and that 4th surveyor got the project. And I had a chance to talk to that agency after that, and here's what I told them. I said, look, if you've got 3 reputable, fairly good quality surveying firms, all within 10% of each other, and then you go choose the surveyor that was 50% of everybody else's price, you're in trouble. either that surveyor missed something, right? He didn't understand some of your requirements, right? Or he's out to cheat you, and you're going to end up paying more than you would have if you'd have selected one of the other 3 firms that have a reasonable price. So, when you're a client, whether you're public agency or private, and if you happen to decide to get multiple fees, multiple cost estimates, and I don't know that's always a good idea, but let's say that you do that. If you got one guy that's half the price of everybody else, you need to ask some questions. Like, what's up, right? That smells fishy. And like, look, I don't get upset when I lose a project to a reputable competitor because he's 10% cheaper or 20% cheaper. That happens sometimes, right? Workload varies, people's resources vary, their schedules are different. That's part of the beauty of a free market. Sometimes my buddy Tom or my buddy Mike or my buddy Kevin, they've got less work than I do, this week, or they recently did some work next door to the project, and so their costs are going to be a little lower, and so they're 10% lower, they're 15% lower, they're 20% lower. That happens, and I understand that. You got some guy that's 30 or 40 or 50% of my price, something's up. I recently did a boundary survey estimate. It was a fairly simple survey for a lady. She owned an expensive home in the Bay Area, and I told her it was about $5,000 to do her survey. And she called me back and she said, "Hey, really appreciate." She was a super nice lady. "Really appreciate you putting your proposal together. Hey, I got a guy down the street that said he would do it for $1,200. I said, "Hey, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's a free market. You're welcome to choose that other surveyor." I said, "I'm a little concerned that he's 1/4 of my price. What I did was I sent her my scope of services, and I said, you talk to that other surveyor and make sure he's going to do everything I've got in this scope of services, because I'm worried he's not including something and you're going to end up paying more than you think." So if you're a public agency and you're selecting a consultant that has a ridiculously low price, you're not practicing QBS. You're doing something else, and you're probably going to get into trouble. All right. The other thing that agencies do that help you realize they're not following QBS is they take every opportunity they can to try and wiggle out of the requirement. So they'll say, well, QBS doesn't apply because of this, or QBS doesn't apply in this circumstance because of this, or the funding's coming from over here, so that's why QBS doesn't apply. And here's what I tell consultants and other surveyors. You got a client like that, don't work for them, right? If they're only following QBS when you've got a gun to their head, they're not following QBS anyways. They're just paying lip service. They're probably following QBB. They're doing qualifications-based bidding. And you want to work for a client that understands why QBS should be used. They get it, and they really genuinely try and follow the process. If you've got a city or a county or a reclamation district or a flood control district or an irrigation district, they're just following QBS because you got a gun to their head, they don't get it, and they're not going to be a good client. So don't work for them. That's my argument there. All right. Is QBS perfect? Got to be fair here. No, QBS is not perfect. You can use QBS and to select your land surveyor and still get a bad survey. Still get a bad surveyor. Still have problems. So it isn't perfect, and I want to admit that. You can have a danger of the good old boy network. You can get into a situation where if you're not careful, somebody's getting work because they're quote-unquote qualified and they're still doing poor quality work. What I would encourage clients to do is hold your surveyor accountable. If you select them for a project and they don't do a good job, don't select them again for your next project. And what that does is that teaches your local consultant community that you mean business and that you demand good service and quality work product. And good surveyors will learn that, and they will vigorously compete to get your work. And the scum, the cheaters, and the lowlifes will not even pursue work for your agency because they realize that you're going to hold their feet to the fire. So manage, once you get a surveyor under contract, hold them accountable, manage their work product well, demand good service. So QBS isn't perfect. Even when you select on QBS, you still got to manage that contract as the client. And, I would also encourage, the best thing a client can do if they want to ensure that they're not getting taken advantage of is, especially if you're a local agency, build a relationship with a couple good surveyors, maybe even 3 or 4. Find out who's doing a good job in your local community and rotate your work through those firms and that keeps them honest, keeps them competitive, but allows you to build good relationships. So QBS isn't perfect, but you can do things as a client to make it work better. If you're using QBS as a client, you need to reality check your consultant's fee, especially if it's somebody you haven't worked with before. Make sure their costs are reasonable. Ask them for a cost breakdown. Look at their man hours. If something doesn't look right, if it's twice as much as you think it should be, have a conversation with them. I never get offended by a client that calls me and says, "Hey, Landon, I don't understand this part of your cost estimate. Can you talk to me about why it costs that much?" And usually what happens is the client walks away from that with an education. They're like, now I understand, Landon, why I just had a conversation with an attorney last week. He's like, "Hey, I don't understand why you're telling me it's going to cost this much to get this done." And I said, "Well, hey, here's why, ABC." He said, "Holy crap, you're right." He said, "I can't believe I missed this. I'm glad we had this conversation. Now I understand, and I can go back and talk to my client about why this is the right approach." And then there's other times when the client has come to me and said, "Hey, Landon, this doesn't look right to me. This seems like this number's high." And I take a look and I say, "You know what? You're right, it is high. We made a mistake. I had the wrong hourly rate plugged into my spreadsheet, or I thought we needed to do A and we really only need to do B. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. We fixed it. Here's the revised cost estimate." I'm not perfect, and my team's not perfect. You don't have to be embarrassed if you're a client, and especially if you're using qualifications-based selection. When you get to the stage where you're talking to your surveyor about cost, if you have questions, ask your surveyor. Ask her, what does this mean? Why does this cost what it costs? If you've got a good surveyor, she's going to explain to you. She's going to take the time. She's going to educate you, and it's a beautiful process when it works well. So should private sector clients use QBS? We know it's the law for public agencies, but should private sector clients use it? Absolutely they should. I talk about that all the time. For all those reasons we mentioned, your upfront cost estimates are going to be more accurate. It's going to encourage good behavior by your consultants. It's going to result in the delivery of higher quality work products. It's going to allow your surveyor to innovate and to take unique approaches to each one of your projects. It's going to promote the building of good long-term relationships. Absolutely, private sector clients should use qualifications-based selection. Here at Redefined Horizons, I do not compete for work based on low price. I just won't do it. You will always find somebody cheaper, and there's always somebody out there that's willing to cut corners. I don't do that. If that's what you want, we're not a good fit for you as a client. And I talk about that at great length in some other videos. So let me just finish with a quick illustration that I hope demonstrates why qualifications-based selection is so important. Let's say that I needed a hip surgery. I needed to have my hip replaced, right? How would I feel if my wife, Monique, decided to select my hip surgeon based on whoever would do the hip surgery for the lowest price? And that's all she looked at. All she worried about was the lowest price. What kind of hip surgery would I get? Right? I would worry about that, right, as the patient. Okay? Now, my wife loves me. I don't think she would do that. Now, I'm not saying that price is irrelevant in that decision, because my wife and I would certainly look at the cost. And if a hip surgeon was double the cost, especially if my wife and I were, we'd be paying for part of that. I'm a business owner. I pay the health insurance costs here. I would want to know, hey, maybe he's a great hip surgeon. Why is he double? Maybe there's a good reason why he's double. Maybe there isn't a good reason why he's double. Maybe I can get a good hip surgery for half the price. Maybe I talked to 3 or 4 hip surgeons and they're all in the same price range, but one guy's half. Man, that would make me nervous, right? And more importantly, what I would want to look at is not just what that hip surgery costs, but I want to look at, who is this surgeon? What kind of clinic does he practice in? What type of services do they provide there? How many hip surgeries has he done before? What kind of hip implant is he putting in my leg, right? Who's the manufacturer? What's the quality of the implant? What kind of reviews does that implant get online? I would want to have some conversations with my surgeon. How long am I going to be in recovery? Are there any special complications that I might have because of my unique patient history? Are you going to need to give me a blood transfusion? That would be really important to me because of my religious background. I would have all kinds of questions for that hip surgeon, that orthopedic surgeon, completely unrelated to am I going to get the coupon discount on this operation, right? And so here's what I tell people. Obviously, getting a land survey is not a life and death matter, but it is important, and it can be hugely important to the financial well-being of a business or a family. And so, yeah, take some time. Select your surveyor based on qualifications. Ask him or her some questions. Don't just choose your surveyor out based on low price.